Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to our webinar this morning. My name is Maxime, and I'm the Service Delivery Executive here at CBBC, and today I'm joined by an all-star panel of speakers across the world today, so I'm very excited for the content which will be treated to today. Today we're talking about emerging from lockdown, market access and new opportunities for UK food and drink companies in China. This is our F&D sector-focused webinar. Our speakers today will be joined by Ray Smith, the UK China Agriculture, Food and Drink Councillor, and our panellist Mark Tanner, the Managing Director at China Skinny. So first and foremost, before we get started, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear and see us. We all have our webcams switched on today, so you should be able to see our lovely faces. And you'll see here, I've got an example of your GoToWebinar panel on the screen. On your left, you should have a small hand button. I'd be really grateful if everyone could give that a click and give me a virtual hands up, and that will let me know that the sound is working and everything's going well. Perfect. I can see some hands going up, so that's great. I've also circled here our questions box as well. Please do send over any questions which you have. We've prepared some questions from our members, and we will kick off a panel discussion after the presentations. But any burning questions, you have your very own drop-down questions box on your screen. You can just type them in there and send them across, and we will collect them and address them at the end. So please don't be shy. We want to make this as engaging as possible. And as well, just a little bit about CBBC for those of you who might not know. CBBC is the China-Britain Business Council. We're the leading organisation supporting and championing UK-China trade. Here in the UK, we have offices across the country supporting a variety of regions. Today, we're all across the country. We're in Wales, England and Scotland, and also New Zealand. And we have our employees supporting various industry sectors as well. Here on the consumer team, we support the creative, travel and tourism industries. We have our retail and e-commerce sector as well, and of course, our agriculture, food and drink sector. Over in China, we have an even larger team. So we have a network which has been built up over the last 60 years. We have partners all across the country in a huge variety of cities covering, you can see on the map here, covering most of the first tier cities at Shanghai, Chengdu, not Chengdu, Shenzhen, Guangzhou and Beijing, and also a number of second and third tier cities as well. We have a really wonderful China team over there on the ground, supporting our UK businesses, either developing or breaking into their China market. And as well, just a quick slide about the China opportunity specific to the food and drink sector. Just a couple of stats to blow your mind about the size of it, really. So China will overtake the US to become the world's largest grocery market by 2023. And last year, the China imported food and drink market was the size of 780 million. And it was actually the only export country from the UK in the top 20 with double-digit growth at 25%, which is a very, very positive sign. And lastly, on China's online e-commerce market, I think Mark might talk a little bit more about this on the consumer trends at the end. So China's online retail market alone is worth more than the next 10 largest online markets combined, which is crazy, valued at 1.2 billion.
I think that should be trillion, Maxine.
Trillion, sorry, my mistake. Thank you, Mark.
It's China, it's all big numbers.
1.2 trillion. There you go, even crazier. And also just want to take a moment to detail some of CBBC's food and drink services and activities which we have going on. As I said, we have a really great consumer team here at CBBC. And for online resources, we have a huge variation available. And please do go to our website and have a look. We have everything from food and beverage regulation guides and insights. As you can see here, these are covering all of the different subsectors in the food and drink categories. We have digital audit and e-analytics services, so you can optimize your brand online. Our masterclasses, so usually we have lots of masterclasses going on, and these are offline events. So we would usually host these in our office. Unfortunately, they've had to be postponed this year due to COVID, so we're hoping to hit the ground running come autumn and have these hosted as normal in our offices. So keep your eyes peeled for those. We also have consumer research surveys and our good old China Hotpot newsletter, which is full of recent news updates and regulatory updates for food and drink, and lots of export opportunities, so packed with information there. I've also added onto the end our member directory for food and drink brands here at CBBC. This is a lovely little PDF which you can have a look at on the website. It's a joy to look through, and it details all of our members, all of their sort of top products, and a little bit about them as well. So do go and have a look there. And in terms of offline in-market support, again, we have loads of stuff going on, from traditional trade fairs. I've got some images from FHC Shanghai last year down the bottom here, to meet the buyers as well. So CBBC can facilitate individual meet the buyers with targeted Chinese buyers. We have our Great British Brands Festival. So last year it was Paddington themed. You can see in the bottom left here. That was very cute and also very, very successful. We have CBBC's own British Heritage Brand Workshops. This is a new service, and it's a fantastic way to get your food and drink products to directly engage with a very targeted group of Chinese consumers. And of course, we have our Launchpad and our China Navigator services. Launchpad being a really fantastic stepping stone for any company looking to enter the China market and maybe even set up their own Wi-Fi. You can have a CBBC representative championing your brand on the ground in China. As I said, we're a membership organisation. We have over 900 member companies developing and also breaking into the China market, as I said. Here, you'll probably recognise a lot of these. We have a real mix from some of our larger partner organisations, all the way down to some really unique and dynamic SMEs as well. Our consumer team, again, so on the UK, we have Antonetta Becker. Antonetta is the Director of Consumer Economy, and she is also the Food and Drink Sector Lead for the UK. She will be moderating this webinar today. And you have me. I am a Service Delivery Executive and support across the consumer team. Over in China, we have Ran Guo. Ran is the China Sector Lead based in Beijing. Mei Chu is the Assistant Director for Consumer and Creative Industry in Shanghai. As I said, we also have some colleagues in Chengdu. We have Jean, Yun, and Yet, and even more across the whole of the consumer team. It's a lot of our team are on the ground there in China, helping our member companies in market. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers today. So first up, and I'm going to hand over the screen to you very shortly, Ray, is Ray Smith, the UK China Agriculture, Food and Drink Councillor. So as I said, Ray is usually posted in Beijing at the Foreign and Commonwealth Asia Pacific Office as the Agriculture, Food and Drink Councillor. Ray has a wealth of knowledge from the many private and public sector UK and Chinese clients she supports. Her network of multipliers across sectors enables Ray to assist small and medium-sized organisations to achieve their goals of internationalisation. Ray leads a skilled team of agriculture, food and drink professionals trained to support organisations seeking to enter the China market or invest from China into the UK. So welcome, Ray. I'm going to hand over to you shortly. Our second panellist today is Mark Tanner, who just nipped in there to correct my stat. So Mark is also usually based in China in Shanghai. He is the founder and managing director of Shanghai-based China Skinny. He has provided China market growth strategies and research to around 200 brands, including Nike, Colgate, and IKEA. His views on China have been quoted in more than 200 international media outlets, and he is both a columnist at Forbes, and he also currently authors the most read newsletter about marketing to China, and that's China Skinny, of course. So welcome, Mark. Looking forward to hearing from you shortly. And last but certainly not least, we have Antonetta Becker, who's going to be moderating our Q&A after our presentations. So Antonetta is the China Britain Business Council's Food and Drink UK Sector Lead and Director of Consumer Economy. She joined CBBC after more than 20 years of living and working in China for a range of international publications, including The Economist. As a China business advisor and food and drink specialist for CBBC, Antonetta has worked with hundreds of UK companies over the last 5 years, supporting their initial interest and entry into the Chinese market, as well as further business expansion. So thank you so much, everybody, for persevering with my introduction. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, and that's Ray Smith. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you for inviting me to talk today. My name's Ray Smith. I'm the Agriculture, Food and Drink Counsellor at the British Embassy in Beijing, and I run a Department of International Trade sector team, which is split into two, half of which does market access and the other half which does direct trade support for companies. Despite running a DIT team, I'm actually paid for by DEFRA in the UK and AHDB, so very much the agriculture department is my focus, and I also deal with the Foreign Office, so FCO policy aspect, so I wear kind of 4 different hats. So today I'm going to focus on the market access aspects of China. So we've done really well at trading with China, and other than the US and the EU, China is our largest trading partner at the moment. On the right hand side of the screen, you can see what we traded in 2019. So these figures are from January to December 2019, showing you what our highest commodities were in terms of trade, and also the increase or decrease in that trade. So obviously pork has been very successful. This is predominantly to do with African swine fever, which has decimated the Chinese pork, domestic pork supply, and led to a huge increase in traded pork from all countries. So we benefited, lots of other countries also benefited. Whiskey is also on the increase, which is quite surprising because actually the trend for drinking a bottle of whiskey in bars seems to be decreasing and is being taken over by cocktails and beers. However, there is an increase. What it tends to be is collectors actually buying more of the higher end whiskies. So the actual volume is probably less, but the value is higher. Beer, as you can see, has had a lot of success. This has been an ongoing upward trend since Xi Jinping drank a pint of IPA when he visited with David Cameron the UK about 2014-15. Our miscellaneous food ingredients is a kind of catch-all for all sorts of interesting, exciting things. And the edible offal and other meats is a big question mark. We're not entirely sure what's captured in these HMRC figures. Salmon, as you can see, decreased last year. That's predominantly because the Norwegians had an issue with their salmon in 2018. That was overcome in 2019, and they became the dominant seller, which they had been previously. So this blip is actually nothing particular to worry about. Shellfish has gone down. This is something to worry about. This, we believe, is probably to do with us losing access to hairy brown crab. We haven't technically got a ban. What we have is 100% testing of all of our crabs to check for the cadmium levels. And because of this, a lot of importers are refusing to actually import hairy brown crab because the survival rate during the testing process, which takes 3 days, is quite low. So that's caused a lot of problems for the industry, and we're working with the Chinese authorities to see if we can overcome that problem. Milk powder fluctuates considerably, so from year on year it will go up or down. However, there is an increase in China domestic production of dairy, and so I wouldn't expect milk powder to be on the rise anytime soon. However, infant food is on the rise, and this is largely to do with Chinese middle class getting richer and wanting packaged rather than homemade foods. and believing that international foods tend to be healthier, more nutritious, full of vitamins. So there's a real opportunity there for infant foods. And our fish industry externally of shellfish and salmon is, as you can see, thriving, which is really interesting because actually we import quite a lot of fish from China. So it's a two-way export-import opportunity there. So, oh, hang on, have I gone past one? The food safety has always been an issue in China. It's the predominant concern about anything that's bought, whether internationally or domestic. And you can see in the bottom of this slide, there is a series of things that have come up over the years which have increased food safety laws. And the latest one has been COVID. And because of COVID and the belief that that started in a wet market, there has been a serious look at food standards. There's been changes in regulations around what can be traded as meat. Dog has now been removed from the list of things that can be traded as meat, and a lot of wild animals have been banned from being farmed. This has actually caused quite a lot of problems in China because there are some villages where the entire employment is around farming a particular animal. So for example, there's a rural village where there's 300 people employed in farming snakes, and snakes have now been banned from being traded as meat, which means that the entire rural village is unemployed. So I think that that will be something that will need to be reviewed, and I don't think that all of those changes will stick. However, I do think that it will, there will be some things that stick around because of COVID, and I'll come back to that because there's been some interesting things happening that we should discuss later. So COVID is only one in a series of incidents stemming from China that relate to food and food safety. Obviously, SARS in 2002-03 caused a massive problem, and it was a zoonotic disease. The African swine fever, although not a zoonotic disease, has had a massive impact globally on pork and other meat sales, because China had approximately half of all of the pigs in the world, and they had to cull around a third of their population, which means that a huge proportion of the pigs in the world were killed, and that impacts the ability of all people globally to access protein. And then this latest one with COVID again has caused huge problems, and there are a lot of concerns around food and whether or not COVID can be passed on through food, which I'll come back to. So our team work to support products to get into market. So companies will contact us and say, we would like to export, for example, cherries. We will check whether or not there is already an access route for these products into China. If there aren't, we will start negotiating that with GACC, the customs authorities in China. We also look at bans and restrictions. We deal with overarching trade disputes, and also some of the political issues that interrupt trade, which, for example, at the moment, Hong Kong is certainly not helping. And COVID is also becoming an issue, and I'm sure that our decision around Huawei will impact on trade. We try and influence and change regulations. We have been doing that as part of the EU delegation, and we will now have to do that independently. So we will be looking to work more with the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and other countries with like-minded views. We advise companies on market access, which I'm doing right now, but more importantly, Sunwei and Maggie in my team, whose contact details are in the screen, they are our experts and can give really effective answers about whether or not something has market access. They can help to release products that are caught in customs by negotiating with customs officers to deal with problems that arise. And we also support overseas territories in trying to get products into market. So if you have a product that you want to get into China, there are some key questions that you need to ask before even embarking on this venture. The first one obviously is, have you got market access to China? If not, it's a long journey. Market access for any product can take minimum 2 years, and more likely 5 to 10 years. If there is market access, is your company registered? If it's not, you need to register your company. Does the product comply with Chinese standards? There are an awful lot of Chinese standards. They do not necessarily align with other international standards, and you need to make sure that they comply with China standards in order to get your product into China. And this includes labeling, which is really, really important. And a lot of companies come unstuck because there are professional consumers who go around and look at whether or not the labels comply. And if they do not comply, they can cause a lot of problems and fines for the company around the labeling in particular. And then, does your product require a food safety certificate? And that is mainly for high-risk products like meat and dairy. So the products that we currently do have access for is pork products, non-live fishery products, most of them, fishery products, dairy from cow. We're working on goat and sheep. Most ambient products, although there are problems where they have egg or egg powder in them because we have a ban on poultry and all poultry products. Honey, although again there is sometimes an issue with honey and a certain insect bacteria that is present in some honeys. Alcohol, and most recently we have got access for beef. Ones that we're currently working on that are hopefully coming down the line are pet food, specifically vegetarian pet food, and feed additives. We've got a questionnaire with the GACC for lamb. We are working on getting the avian influenza ban lifted so we can get access for poultry meat. Processed pork is something that has there's been industry desire to look at, and we are considering that. And then we are working on things like some cereals, and there are some issues around some tea flavors because they are linked with traditional Chinese medicine, and that can sometimes cause problems in terms of their access. The current bans in place, so we've managed to lift the BSE ban, but there are still other bans in place, the main ones being avian influenza and scrapie. And we are working currently with the GACC to lift these, but this slide just gives you a kind of rough idea of the shortest timelines for being able to get market access, and as you can see, they're rather long. Where you have to register your product, depending on what your product is, depends on who you have to register with. Most of them have to be registered with GACC. Occasionally, they also have to be registered with the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs or the standards for infant formula because it's a health and safety issue. So it's got additional regulations. The one in yellow, live fisheries products, that has come about in the last couple of weeks because of COVID. So previously, you did not have to register your company if you were exporting live fisheries. Now you do. So that's a really important change that's happened just in the last couple of weeks. I'm not going to go through all of the Chinese standards, but just to highlight the fact that there are over 5,000 food standards and there are 1,200 food safety standards. So you really do need to know what you're doing when you're exporting to China and be aware of what the differences are between China and other international countries, because they're not the same. And a food safety certificate is also important if you are exporting on high risk stuff. We have recently, because of COVID, managed to switch from hard copy paper certificates to an online certificate, scanned certificate. That's been really useful in terms of not having to have physical paper, which means that when during lockdown we were still able to proceed with this. We're hoping that we'll be able to keep this system, but there is no guarantee because it was agreed as a temporary measure during COVID. So we'll be lobbying for that, along with other countries who've also found this flexibility quite useful. And just the final slide here is the entire team. So you've got myself, I have my head of food and drink trade, Stuart Dunn, who's based in Shanghai, with his team that consist of Freya Han in Beijing, Fei Xu and Ziyu Zhu in Shanghai, and Elaine Gao in Chongqing. And we have a support officer, Annie Pei, who's also based in Shanghai. And then from the market access side, Sunwei and Maggie Yu are our 2 market access experts. So if you need to know anything, or you have stuff stuck in customs, or you're having problems with the authorities around areas, they are the people to talk to. We're always welcome direct contact, but sometimes, depending on what your product is, you might be better off going through DEFRA, because it's quite likely, if it's about getting market access, that DEFRA will need to be in the mix anyway. I'm going to leave it there, because I'm sure that there are lots of stuff that I haven't covered that you'll want to cover in questions. And I think that's where we'll probably discuss more about the impact of COVID. So I won't go into that right now. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ray. I can see we have quite a few questions coming into my little box. So yeah, wonderful in there. And without further ado, I know we're a bit short on time, so I will hand over to Mark, if you're still there.
I am. Great to be back.
Wonderful. I'm just going to hand over the screen to yourself.
Fabulous. All right, hopefully you can see that. All right, so just as a little bit of background, China's skinny. We realized that this COVID was going to be a bit of an issue back in mid-January, so we jumped on it pretty quickly and allocated a lot of resource to really just trying to understand what was happening. As a result, we've been fortunate to get quite a few COVID-related projects, which has increased our knowledge. And so I'm going to share a little bit of that and also some observations we're seeing in the market over the past almost 6 months now. So a little short history and what has happened in COVID since it all began in mid-January. If you look at, there's been, what we've seen is 3 distinct stages. The first being that when that first crisis happened, unlike the rest of the world, it really came with no warning to Chinese. And all of a sudden, they were locked in, particularly around that Chinese New Year or the Spring Festival time. And people went into a state of emergency. There was a lot of wartime style consumption. People were out shopping for instant noodles, rice, bottled water, all those staples that are really, you really only see in the emergency times. But Chinese are a pretty hardy bunch, and it takes a lot to keep them down. So come mid-February, they were bounced back and they were really trying to get on with life. Although the lockdown was still happening, you saw people were getting back to eating well again. They weren't just eating the staples. They were spending time cooking mainly at home and getting some pretty delicious meals coming out of the kitchen. Similarly, they were getting back to school. The kids were, much to the angst of a lot of parents, they were studying at home, as they are in most of the world right now. And people started working from home. People even started the fitness regimes. Unlike a lot of countries where we have a backyard you can run around or just go out into the street, Chinese were inside their apartments. So they were doing a lot of live streaming and fitness in front of those live streams. And then come March, it's quite remarkable just how quickly China really did start getting back to normalcy. So we saw schools starting to open way out west in Xinjiang, and that slowly spread across the country. Now, pretty much most schools are back, and that's a sign that China is feeling pretty confident that they've contained this flu. Similarly, parks were opening, tourist sites were opening, people were actually taking holidays, albeit very close to home, very domestic and quite regionally. Cinemas open but closed again, so they've really been the only one or the hardest hit of the main kind of activities. So things have been looking really good. Retail's bounced back, but it has mainly been online. but it is getting almost back to normal. And that was until mid-June, specifically when we're looking at the food and beverage. And that's when, as I'm sure most of you are aware, that there was this salmon that they blamed for a reinfection in Beijing that really spread pretty quickly. And that on the food front has changed quite a lot. Since then, there's been 14 plants around the world, everywhere from America to Brazil to Germany, Netherlands, Canada, that have had their factories or production outfits have been temporarily suspended in China. And then there's been another 7, including the UK, Italy, Argentina, that have voluntarily suspended imports into China, particularly from meat, poultry, particularly pork, beef. And that's not only obviously stopped those specific plants, but overall imports into China have been really hard hit from both that's been slowed down at ports and inspections, but also consumer sentiment. And although there's no evidence that COVID can spread in packaging or food, particularly salmon, which doesn't even have gills for the respiratory disease, but Chinese are really quite concerned. And we were actually running a poll at China Skinny, an online survey, just really trying to track consumer sentiment towards imported food. And it went right over the middle of that survey was when the salmon outbreak happened. And all of a sudden we looked at, there was this real concern around imported food in general, that it would be unsafe. And as Ray was talking about, there's that food safety is such a concern for Chinese consumers. So it has really impacted, and it has, on top of the geopolitical issues right now, has really pushed a real localization, a domestic demand for food. It's been a little bit tougher for imports to really shine through, but at the same time, there's still that perception that it is safer, it is better quality, etc. Overall. But if we look at some of the key trends that are happening in the market, health is obviously the big one, and that's, I think, the world over. You're seeing products that are aligned to immunity. There's all sorts of products that are making claims, and we track claims across a lot of different categories, and we've seen a real spike in people claiming immunity, even categories that you may not expect to be too naturally. And a good example of that is the infant formula category, where we've seen claims of lactoferrin and whey helping babies' immunity, although there's no real solid evidence of that. Consumers are going crazy importing this stuff, and hoping that their kids will be healthier as a result. But it's not just that immunity, vitamin C, etc. It's also health and fitness and well-being. As I said, consumers really were trying to do a lot of exercise at home, just to proactively be fit, and also from a beauty perspective, they don't want to get plump when they're stuck in home. So you're getting a lot of consumers that when things loosened up, they were doing a lot more exercise than they had pre-COVID, to try and get back in from a period of sitting at home and eating and not doing much else. So the fitness and well-being we've seen as a real spike in interest from Chinese. And there's been a lot of good food and beverage brands that have really jumped on that trend and really worked with food that is related to health and protein and being fit and things. A big one is homebodies, and we've obviously, with people at home, they were sticking to the cooking at home, whereas China's traditionally been quite an eat-out society or get delivered. People didn't trust going to a crowded restaurant or even a restaurant in public where they could catch the disease. And similarly, they didn't really want to trust the delivery man or the chef who might be infected, so they could catch it that way. So a lot of consumers some of them have learnt to cook. They couldn't really cook before, a lot of these young'uns. A lot of them have got more confident and I guess more embellishing the way they're cooking. There's been a lot of live streams and a lot of content around recipes, etc. And people thought this may end as people get back to normal lives again. But quite the contrary, we've seen an awful lot of people still buying the types of ingredients that you use for home cooking. The recent 618, which is the massive mid-year e-commerce festival, which did almost $150 billion in 18 days. The fastest growing category was groceries, because people are now buying their groceries and cooking at home. And the third fastest growing category was kitchen appliances. So people are now investing in infrastructure, and we've seen similar growth with the likes of ovens, stovetop ovens, and cooking air fryers, all those types of things. People are investing in their kitchens and really wanting to eat at home a lot more. Category specific needs, we've seen some interesting insights from that. We're doing a project with Colgate around the oral care category, what people are buying, and with everyone wearing face masks, people found, ooh, I can actually smell my breath is not that good. So we saw a real spike in mouthwash and some other crazy categories, cosmetics. There was people that were wanting to buy cream that would help the indent of the face mask. So quite quick movers, a lot of these brands that really got onto it and really capitalized on it. Now, pets is another big category, and I know Ray had said that the UK doesn't have access for pet food, but one of the really fast growing categories we saw was cross-border e-commerce, and we've seen it over the last few months. It's been a real spike in Chinese consumers buying premium imported pet food. And what happened when the lockdown first started, there were all sorts of rumors about people and their pets can spread the virus, although I think there was only one dog or something in Hong Kong or something that had spread it. But people were quite worried. So there were some poor pets left out on the street to find their own way, where people took safety in their homes. But for the most part, people were taking their pets in, and during that time of lockdown, the pet brought them comfort and companionship and entertainment in a lot of cases. So pets, which are already very much on trend, and people are treating them just in the way you treat a baby, people were spending on their pets, and that has accelerated as a result. But probably relevant to everyone is this big one, reflection and purpose. And there's nothing quite like a lockdown for you to sit at home and think about what's important to you. And that's both from my sense of purpose as a Chinese consumer, but also as a brand purpose. So which brands are important for me? And we've seen some real trending terms that people are interested in looking for when they're choosing brands, which will be important going forward. Now that from a change as far as marketing and sales, there's been a significant pivot to digital. It's obviously been quite relevant for most categories. Probably the most relevant is fresh food, and that was one of the slowest growing, or one of the lowly engaged categories prior to COVID. Infrastructure wasn't great, and it was starting to take off. But with COVID, there were very limited delivery people for e-commerce. And so the e-commerce companies, the Alibabas, the JDs of the world, they realized that they needed to prioritize the few delivery resources they had to get people their necessities. So things like fresh food really were focused on. And similarly, there was a lot of farmers out there that had a lot of their fresh food that they've grown. It was perishing on the trees or on the ground because no one was there to buy it. They couldn't get it to the wholesaler or the warehouses, the markets. So they really teamed up with a lot of the Alibabas of the world and in a great corporate social responsibility, connected consumer needs with farmers. And that's really helped the infrastructure and the awareness and just the habit of buying online, which we've seen continue. Another one is just the demographic of e-commerce consumers. And it's e-commerce growth was actually slowing down quite a lot. Although there's a lot of buzz about e-commerce, year on year it was slowing down, mainly because the consumers that were buying it were that kind of mid-level millennial group, and the older and the lower tier consumers were very elusive. But all of a sudden, this COVID thing happened, and these guys had no other alternatives but to buy online. And a lot of the older people had their younger relations living with them, and who could show them how to use e-commerce. So they got online, and if you look at the data pre-COVID, those over 30, which is considered old in China, made up 49% pre-COVID, and that went up to 60% after just a month after the virus. Similarly, tier 3 cities, which made up 57%, within a month was up at 69%. So quite a shift in who was shopping, and we've seen that continue. And what's really interesting is now you've almost got two tiers of online shoppers in China: the more mature guys that have been shopping for a long time, and then these newbies, the older, the less sophisticated, lower tier consumers, which have different needs and I guess address it in different ways. So it's really important to not treat them all as the same. Now, I think one of the most exciting things that's happened is around the diversity of commerce. It used to be a two-horse race with Alibaba and JD, and now it's really you've got most of the digital platforms doing social commerce, and for a lot of businesses, particularly those traditional brick and mortar retailers, they've come in and they have
Oh, sorry, Mark. I think we've lost your sound just momentarily.
they've gone on to social commerce, a really quick and easy way for them to transition when no one was going to their store. Significantly faster, whilst it's still definitely not the majority. Depending on who you talk to, it's between 25 to 35% of the market, but it has grown significantly and does warrant some form of localization. So you look at the way consumers buy products, food and beverage products online, it's quite different from the way they purchase in a store. They are seeking a lot more information. There's a lot more ability to talk about your brand and what's important, your heritage, etc., which is so great about a lot of British brands, rather than just in a store where you've got the packaging, or if it's a fruit, you've got a sticker on a fruit and a little bit of point of sale. But now with e-commerce, you've got all this different information you can have on there. And e-commerce sites in China are significantly larger for the storefronts than they are in other countries. So a lot of scope to really do some interesting things there. Similarly, packaging. If you're looking at something like pork, in a shop, you're looking, you pick up the pork and you look if it's grey or if it looks good. Whereas on e-commerce, you just can't do that. So in a screen full of pork, you probably want a picture that will stand out. Formats are different, the way people shop. And so there's all sorts of different considerations with that transition to online to make, rather than just trying to fit the brick and mortar product and branding into an online world. Just quickly, because I know we are short of time, brick and mortar consolidation. There are some brick and mortar companies that are really not doing so well, and we expect there'll be the likes of Alibaba, JD, Tencent will be swooping in and trying to acquire some of these companies, and then throwing in their new retail technology, which was already happening and is much higher yields for retailers when they're integrating that. So expect to see that consolidation. And a lot of brands are going from trade to retail. There's some really good examples of companies that really had to pivot towards that retail because hospitality was hurting, as it is in most markets. And for brands that really tie out consumer, look at the Daigou trade, so the guys that are shopping in Waitrose and sending it back to their family and friends in China, that is going to be less so than it has been in the past, with less tourists, less students, people staying in China. And similarly, less logistics. It's a lot harder to get products back into China right now, a lot more uncertainty. And so consumers will take different routes to get their goods. Now, I was going to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing, and we track a lot of these. We have a lot of tools at China Skinny that looks at the way the things that are trending based on people's searches, people's purchases online, social buzz, etc. But I know I am a little bit conscious of time, and the really exciting bit with Antoinetta, the Q&A, I think we should focus on that. So I'm sure this will be circulated, this report, and hopefully you can see some of these trends that are happening in the market. Just before I tag off, I like to do one more thing, and just, if you only learn one thing from me today, I'd recommend going on to chinaskinny.com and subscribing to our newsletter. There's a lot about food and beverage. It comes out every week, and it really helps keep up to date with some of the trends and some of the happenings in the market. It's free, concise, doesn't take a long time to read, but will hopefully keep you very up to date. chinaskinny.com.
Thank you, Mark. Another wonderful presentation. I'm just going to hand over the screen to Antoinetta.
Great.
Thank you, Maxime. And I wanted to thank our wonderful speakers for those deep dives into the complexity of market access for China and the consumer sentiment and market trends at the moment. How does politics affect this, Ray? I think we've seen China in the past block access to Australian beef products and impose tariffs to Australian barley. With the UK at the moment reviewing the Chinese telecom giant's Huawei involvement in British networks. What are UK brands supposed to see similar challenges? I think we've had the Chinese ambassador Liu Xiaomin on an online press conference earlier this week, admonishing not to go back on the Huawei's decision because there will be consequences unspecified. Can we hear a bit more from you as to how you view this particular moment for UK brands and what's going to happen?
Yeah, sure. I think the interesting thing about China is that trade is inextricably linked with politics. And it was very interesting when the stuff happened with Australia and the beef and the barley, because it was technically linked to issues that could be legitimately said to be problems with standards or compliance, but the timing was so obviously political. So there's always a fallback of like, no, we're not doing it politically. It's because this wasn't filled in properly, or we did these tests and something happened. But there is no doubt that the politics between two countries has a direct impact on the success of trade. Now, that's not usually as extreme as existing trade being held up, but it certainly slows down market access. We thought in November 2018 that we were going to get the avian influenza ban lifted. But you may remember around that time there was some issues with the South China Sea, and our country was relatively vocal, as were some others, about what was happening there. And we didn't get the avian influenza ban lifted. Now, there is no you cannot directly point to a causal relationship, but the correlation is there. And there will be similarities in terms of what's currently going on with Hong Kong, the decisions we've made around Huawei, that will impact on the relationship. It also impacts on consumer demand, because Chinese citizens are very loyal to China on the whole, and as a result, if the Chinese government are saying we're having a fight with this country, there will be a significant number of people who go, well, we're not going to buy products from that country then. And you see it a lot with products that will suddenly go out of favour. And I think that that's likely to happen as well. I think this is the trouble is, I think this is an ongoing thing. I think previously it's been little blips. This one I think is going to be a bit bigger. The only kind of upside is that we're not alone, because other countries are also being quite vocal about Hong Kong and about Huawei. So, you know, they have to get their products from somewhere.
Well, this is it. And I think I wanted to kind of bring in Mark into the conversation to see how political can consumer sentiment actually get. We know it is a top-down society, so decisions made by Beijing to trickle down to consumers. And how that, if political tensions were to rise between the UK and China, would Chinese consumers shun British products despite all the heritage, despite all the provenance, despite everything that you just described, the need for new healthy sources of protein, the love for heritage, the love for novelty and innovation? How would that play out, Mark?
Yeah, it's a good question, Antoinetta. There's no question that what the government is saying and doing does influence consumers, and obviously they control all of the media. And during COVID, Chinese consumer sentiment towards their government has actually improved, whereas a lot of other countries in the world, there's people questioning their leadership ability. Chinese are feeling better about the party than ever before, and so they are really very connected at the hip as far as that mentality. And as I said during the presentation, we were doing research on that very topic right when the salmon issue happened, and there was a direct connection between negative sentiment with specific countries and the geopolitical issues. So obviously the US was right at the bottom, people feeling, I'm not going to buy US products right now. And at the other end of the scale, people are, I'm going to buy Chinese products more than ever. So we're not just competing against other imports, we're also competing against an increasingly savvy Chinese manufacturers and brands.
Thank you. Well, I mean, just looking back again at the market access piece more carefully, Ray, given that, you know, we just heard about the pivot towards products which with very well defined health and wellness properties. You know, I know you've been working to get access for UK products, dairy products from sheep and goat. You know, there is the kind of well-established urban myth that Chinese consumers are lactose intolerant, so they would always veer towards the non-bovine dairy sources. They would look for the alternatives. So do you anticipate any delay in getting that access for sheep and dairy products? I think this was on last year. We were expecting a Chinese government's inspection for some of the dairy sites in the UK. Can you give us an update on this, please?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it's not going to happen this year. You know, that no one's going to be travelling to do inspections in the next. So it was postponed last year, which was disappointing in some ways and positive in other ways, because inspection of all of our bovine dairy, which we hadn't had for a significant number of years. And the issue with that is we currently have access inspection, and you fail, then you lose access. So for that reason, actually pushing that into the long grass is a good thing. However, for the access with sheep and goats, this was going to open up a new opportunity for the market. It was really disappointing that that didn't happen. Obviously, it's not going to happen this year. I anticipate the earliest it would happen is kind of probably Q2 of 2021. I might be being pessimistic on that, maybe it'd be earlier. I mean, the interesting thing is that China is feeling a lot more positive and moving again. But that said, I can't imagine that any of their officials are desperate to jump into the UK with our current COVID stats. You know, I think if they're going to be going and doing inspection visits, they'd probably rather go to New Zealand than the UK.
When New Zealand is closed, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, Mark, I think Ray touched about all of the legislation changes that are happening in China in terms of the wild animal consumption and trade. I think ultimately we've seen the closure and then reopening of these wild animal markets throughout the years since SARS last time. We know their vested interest in those. But what can we expect a consumer sentiment change that will ultimately see consumers walking away from those markets? And what would that mean for those of other animal protein sources like the UK exporters, for instance?
Yeah, this as I said before, pets are in fashion. They were considered bourgeois during the revolutionary years, but now people actually don't see dogs as a protein source. They see them as cute little companions. So there's definitely more awareness of that, and you're starting to see things like the cruelty-free legislation, which will be great for the UK. You're starting to see murmurs that there's going to be an avenue for those companies to get legitimate sales in China without going through the cross-border channels early next year. So all this is related to an increasingly aware government that consumers are getting a little less feral, perhaps, cruelty-free and some of those types of things. But there is always, or some time, going to be a market that still enjoys eating a little bit of wild game, which I'm sure will still be happening under the table somewhere. But I expect they'll come down hard on those official channels.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I think it's also worth mentioning that they're not necessarily the same consumers. So the people to buy internationally imported meat products are probably not the same consumers that are going to a rural wet market and purchasing what's wild animals. I say wild animals because I think there's been a lot of confusion animals because they're quite often farmed. They're farmed animals that aren't animals that we eat in the West, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily wild. You know, they're actually being farmed en masse for meat. But I kind of think that there's still going to be quite a lot of consumption of that type of product, as long as it's not really clamped down on by the government, just because it's cheaper and it's just, you know, these different areas of China are going to be eating different things. It's like Beijingers think that it's disgusting, but Guangzhou eat it all the time, you know.
Yeah. Well, you've got a whole lot of bamboo rack farmers down south that don't want to want to cut their employment. So, yeah, totally agree.
I mean, we also can't ignore the relationship to Chinese tradition. No matter a lot of the ingredients of that are sourced from those animals, and some are used for cure, others are used as aphrodisiac. So we can only count on Chinese consumers, the new wave of Chinese consumers, being educated in a different way to be able to make the right purchasing decisions as well. I think we've got a few other questions coming up, but I think the one that I really wanted to ask Ray today is, because I think it is important for everybody who's tuned in today, is how not to waste a year in trade. Since we are all here, we are not able to travel, but I know that your colleagues have worked very hard to secure some great UK PLC to reconnect with Chinese companies and Chinese consumers this year at CI. So would you be able to talk a little bit about that opportunity?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much that you could be doing to be not wasting a year. And one of the primary things is to be educating yourself about China, so being on this website direction. I would also say marketing. If you can do anything in China, don't bother unless you're prepared to do the marketing as well, because just linking up with a distributor to do all the work in China isn't going to happen. So you need to be thinking about how you're going to market in China, and you can spend all the time that you're not traveling researching that, looking at how other people are marketing in China. But yes, my team are focusing this year on one trade show. So normally Seattle in China, in Shanghai, we would do FHC, the Food Hotel, C stand for
China.
Yeah, Food Hotel China. But unfortunately, because of what's uncertainty around being able to travel to China and the current quarantine, so when you get back from China, that doesn't look like it's an option. So we're focusing on CII, International Import Expo, which is happening in November. We're going to provide opportunities for virtual ASDANs at CII. So for companies who've already got in-market representation and products in market, it's a really good opportunity to have a physical. But if you don't have in-market representation, you can be part of the virtual offer. So we will be producing an e-brochure along with CBBC, and that will be touted around the state-owned enterprises. So CII is very much a kind of government-run massive trade show. It covers all of the different sectors, and the state-owned enterprises are kind of encouraged to hit a certain target of imports through CIE every year. So while there is no official, we will give you a quota. There's no quota. So the SOEs are interested in making deals because they need to show that they have invested properly in CIE. So this is a really good opportunity for UK companies who have the capability to fulfill deals with SOEs. SOEs are massive. If you are a tiny organisation, then don't go making a deal, never be able to ramp up in time to actually be able to fulfill that. So you need to be realistic about what your capabilities are and talk to companies in China, your profile, who fit your abilities. So if you've got a small amount of product that you can ship to China, then you want to be talking to one of the maybe provincial organizations that only covers like a certain number of cities. You don't want to someone like Bright Foods, who's going to want you to cover the whole of China, because you'll never be able to do it, and then you'll default on your deal. But that said, I think CII is a really great option. As far as I know at the moment, we are not charging for joining the e-brochure. There may be some fees for translation, which we need to look into, but it will be done in English and in China. We'll be disseminating it as widely as we can to Chinese organizations from all different provinces. And then we will be facilitating some business-to-business match IE, so that discussions can start beforehand, so that trade deals could actually be signed at CIE. And then at CIE, we've taken 300 square meters of pavilion space in all, and we will be doing a combination of physical attendance, but also we're going to be trying to do some kind of interesting kind of virtual stuff, like maybe some tastings where you kind of have the products in front of you and you put on your headphones and someone talks you through kind of what you should be tasting with each, and make yourself a gin cocktail and stuff like that, to be a bit more fun, a bit more interactive. And we will also have the opportunity for companies who are willing to be on China time for a few days to actually be able to talk directly through video links to clients on the stand. So it should be a really good event. There's going to be a load of media behind it. Chinese media are pretty obsessed with CII, so it usually gets a lot of coverage. And there's some good forums as well that we're going to be trying to get into, particularly around sustainability. So we're going to be talking about beef and sustainable pasture-fed beef, because that's this opportunity. I think we've got WRAP and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation involved as well in talking about food waste and packaging. So I would encourage everyone to get involved, and you can talk to Stuart Dunn or Sam Nixon, and those slides were up earlier, contact details.
Thanks, Ray.
Just with China Skinny, we've done a lot of research into trade shows and strategies, and CIIE in particular, and we've spoken to hundreds of exhibitors. And just to reiterate what you were saying about forming that relationship before CIIE, because what we found, there were two types of exhibitors at CIIE over the last couple of years. One are the ones that just go there and see all these big numbers and everyone's going to be signing quotas. But the deals that are actually done, the brands that are getting deals, are the ones that have a relationship. Many of them are starting that conversation 6 months or about now. And just so when they get to the CIIE, which is effectively just when all the media are there and all the quotas are there, that they can sign the line. But what has actually happened before that is when the deals are done. So really worth getting onto it sooner rather than later, rather than waiting just until the big event in November.
So Mark, just picking up from where, about the need for marketing. You know, we've seen a lot of the news about live streaming, and you know, from UK perspective, it's a difficult one to understand because it's neither TV advertising, QVC either, right? So there is a kind of fine balance between the online celebrities and actually a brand story which wants to preserve its integrity. So there is sometimes an awkward marriage between the online celebrity presenting a bottle or a heritage British tea drink. So do we really need to invest hundreds and thousands of pounds in streaming in order to crack the marketing right? And I think this is also leading to your point as to what can we do now in advance of that and around the show?
It's a really good question. Everyone's talking about live streaming right now, but there are brands that are spending an awful lot of money and giving their products away, because most live streams are prices and things. And they're not actually the only guys making the money out of the live streamers. But if you do it right, live streamer that is really aligned with your brand and your positioning, and if you're a whiskey from, I don't know, some person that's not really well aligned with that, you can, and so when people are buying all these products, that you have a way to keep that relationship transactional, buying something cheap and then move on to the next thing. That's live stream. There's some pretty clever ways that you can get people to connect with you on different social channels and really build that and maintain that relationship, and then sell them product.
Thank you. I think, Ray, as you were talking about CIIE, I could feel the burning desire out there. So we've got 2 or 3 questions as to when can we act China? When would commercial flights resume? Do you have any update on that?
I mean, so there's lots of flights that are claiming to be up and running. So I think Air France, there's Finnair are doing some. You can get to Guangzhou. You can go through Hong Kong. You can go through Addis Ababa if you really want to. One of the main problems is visas, because I think the Chinese embassy has been closed for quite a while, and the visas that they're issuing are quite sporadic. So actually, I think flights are less of an issue, visas are the issue. Business visas particularly are problematic. But things seem to be getting back to normal. The main thing you need to be aware of is the 2-week quarantine period. So at the moment, anyone who travels into China has to quarantine for 2 weeks, and you quarantine in a government hotel of their choice. You have to pay for it, but they choose where you go. So you won't necessarily get a nice plush hotel. You don't necessarily get a hotel with Wi-Fi, and you get their day and that's it for 2 weeks. So you do have to really want to travel to China to be willing to make that commitment. But if you do go, then you have to also bear in mind that you have to then quarantine on the way back into the UK as well. So it's basically putting 4 weeks of your life on hold. If you've got good access, internet access, which isn't guaranteed when you're on the China side, but you know, when you come back and you're quarantining in the UK, you can still be working from home. Most of us have been doing that most of the time anyway. So I don't actually view the back in such a problem, but certainly on the way out, you have to be committed to sort of 2 weeks of dead time. Because it's not even like your 2 weeks in China where you can be traveling around meeting other people. It's 2 weeks where you're able to have video conference because you might not have a good enough Wi-Fi connection in the hotel.
Right.
Sorry, I thought you wanted something positive.
Well, I think my next question is also quite, well, I mean, we can't avoid, I think a couple of our members have asked us to relay their concerns about Brexit, you know, potential deal with China after, you know, after December 2020. So do you have any insights as to what the future holds for UK-China agri-food trade in January?
I mean, you could look at it both ways, couldn't you? Brexit is going to put a strain on UK agri. They've just set up the independent commission to look at standards because UK farmers are very concerned that lowering standards will impact on domestic capability to actually produce food because they'll be competing on an unfair playing field. But the flip side of that is that there is the opportunity to make some really nice trade deals with countries like China. China did a phase 1 agreement with America, well, it'd be about 8 months ago now, which was a really good deal for China. Their agri elements, they sped up access, they gave the competent authority the right to register with a 20-day agreement that it would then be put into the kind of Chinese system. Now, whether or not that's actually happening within 20 days, no one's actually checked yet. But it certainly was a signal that China was very much willing to have that relationship in terms of agri, that they're supposedly got a trade war with. So there is a potential for us to get something similar, and I know that Australia was certainly pushing for it immediately, saying, well, we want the same thing, and we in the UK will also be pushing for a similar relationship where we can get things through in terms of agri much faster. It will be interesting to see what China want in return, because at the moment they don't actually export agri food and drink to us. We do a bit of fish, we do a bit of garlic. That's about it. There is the potential to export a hell of a lot more, but actually because China's very domestic focused, like they've got something that they need to feed, there isn't necessarily that much interest to export agri food and drink. But what they might want is something else, like Huawei. So the issue is, what are we giving in terms of, what are we giving in other sectors in order to gain in agri, and are we willing to do that? And that's something I'm afraid my crystal ball is a bit broken on that one. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. I think we extended our webinar by 15 minutes, but I just couldn't miss the opportunity to have you both with us here on this panel discussion. So we do have a couple of more questions that we will not be able to cover here today, but we will direct them to your email addresses. And I think I would hand it over back to Maxime to share a few more opportunities, how not to waste a year in trading with China. But before that, I really wanted to thank you both, Ray and Mark, all in different parts of the world today with us, discussing all of these things.
over to me now. Yeah, I'm hoping everybody can see my screen here. Just a little summary and some dates for your future diary for anybody interested in some of the things we have going on at CBBC. A couple of virtual things going on, of course. We're still doing a lot of things online. So we have a new activity, which is our virtual New to China product assessment. So the CBBC Food and Drink team are offering a virtual New to China product assessment service for participating UK brands to present their products directly to professional procurement experts in China. So this is going to be through a targeted focus group, and brands will gain some first-hand immediate feedback to help them form their China sales strategies. So yeah, just get into touch with myself or Antonetta, or also Ran. I'll have all these details in the follow-up if you fancy that. We also have our virtual Meet the Buyer. This is now taking place in September, on the 15th of September 2020. Again, get in touch with Antonetta. We have a form which you just need to fill out and forward to Antonetta, and we'll have all of that information in our follow-up as well. This is going to be a sort of warm-up for the trade shows for FHC and hopefully SILE in autumn as well, when these are running. And we also have one more webinar which we will be doing with Santander and Millennium and their Bottle Club, their new CBEC store. So this is going to be on Wednesday, the 29th of July at 9 AM. And it's titled Alcoholic Beverage Export Opportunities in China, Market Trends, Route to Market, and Brand and Marketing. And we'll also be joined by Tong Digital. They headline the UK China Business Week, and also one of our digital service members. So join for that, for all things alcohol in China. And yeah, I'm just going to pull up here as well our speaker contact details. Please don't hesitate to drop any of them an email if you have any more follow-up questions, or any other questions about anything to do with China Skinny, or with our activities here at CBBC. We'll be more than happy to answer them for you. And yeah, we'll have all of these in the follow-up as well. This has been recorded, so if you want to live it again, you can access this online. This will be on our YouTube channel later on as well. And yeah, thank you so much to everybody for tuning in. I know in New Zealand it's quite late, Mark, so I'll let you know. Thank you so much to Mark and to Ray and Antonetta as well for moderating today. And hopefully see you at one of our events next time. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Stay well.